what is premonition and precognition?
Okay, so I'd like to start with intuition because most people have heard of intuition for sure. And intuition I think of as an umbrella term. So it covers all sorts of skills, some of which would be called psychic skills, like precognition is a scientific name for the colloquialism premonition. So those are psychic skills, but others are not. So there's skills like your subconscious mind picking up on information that you're not aware of, and then you draw conclusions, and then you're able to predict events based on, you hear thunder in the distance, you don't realize you hear thunder in the distance, and then you think it might rain, and you say, wow, how did I know it would rain? Well, because you heard thunder in the distance. That's intuition. Precognition is a subset of that. And precognition is the scientific name for accurately getting information about future events that you cannot predict based on your five senses, and you cannot predict based on memory or logic. And I'd like to add to that you cannot predict based on your own activity. So if you really love watermelon and you dream that you'll have watermelon the next day, and then you make yourself watermelon, this is not precognition. This is just something that you do because you like it, right? Yeah. Right. So, the reason we call the book Premonition Code is two things. One is more people have heard of premonitions than precognition. Premonition is a more colloquial term, of course, before and moner, which means to warn. And it used to be used only for negative things, like having a pre-warning of someone's death or premonition of someone's death. But now people talk about having a premonition of winning the lottery or something like that. So now it has become almost exactly the same as precognition, but more people have heard of it. And the other reason is it's a more sense-oriented or less cognitively, like the word precognitive has cognitive in it, and people think that it's more mental, but a premonition is in a sense more physical, and we're talking about both mental and physical aspects. And so that's part of why it also just sounds cooler. Like Premonition Code is a better title just generally. Teresa's a great marketer. And so she thought of the title, and I think she's right that it's much better than Precognition Code. So yeah. She also titled all the chapters, which are all like names of movies, to cute little plays on words. And if it was up to me, it would be much more scientific sounding, but it's not up to me. And thank God, because I think she helps people get into the mood. Let's just be clear. Premonition and precognition we can talk about as essentially the exact same thing, but I'm probably going to use the word precognition because I'm a scientist and that's the word I'm used to using. So when I say precognition, you can translate that into premonitions, but just know that scientifically precognition is the usual term, and that's why I keep repeating it. So can you develop precognition? The yes, it depends. So it's a complicated answer, and everyone asks this question. And the answer is sort of, the overarching answer is yes, and then there's some details there. So think of precognition as like musical ability. So some people are just born with excellent musical ability, and but they're not going to become a concert pianist unless you give them piano lessons. They do need to sit at the piano and practice and learn how to play the notes. But once they do, they're excellent, right? Mm-hmm. And most people have some ability, and they can learn, if you give them lessons, to play some notes and it sounds okay, right? And that's like precognition, I think. And again, there's not enough research on it to really know for sure, but based on what we know, it's clear that the people who are really good at it just need a little bit of development in order to control. We introduced something in the book called controlled precognition, which is where you sit down in a waking state and you actually do certain things to attempt to predict future events that are selected by a random number generator. So there's no other way that you can predict them. And some people will be excellent at that, and they just need to learn how to do it. And other people will be able to do it a little bit, but they still need to learn how to do it. So there's a certain development that everyone can use, I believe. And this is always shaky because there are some people in the field who say there's absolutely no development, and yet they train people to do it. So it's very confusing. But anyway, I also train people to do it, and I see that people can develop. So I know from my own experience that that's the case. And I don't want people to think that everyone could be excellent at it, because that's just I don't think true. I think people are born with certain facilities, and if you are a person who has a lot of precognitive dreams naturally, or something called precognitive compulsions. Precognitive compulsions are where you feel the urge to do something, you don't know why. Um, and you go and do that thing. Let's say a mother runs into the baby's room. The baby's not crying. She doesn't know why she goes there, but all of a sudden she finds the baby's not breathing. These are kind of precognitive compulsions that some people have a lot of those. I'm a person who has a lot of those. I have a lot of precognitive dreams, which is why I got interested in studying this in the first place. And so people who sort of have those natural experiences without trying tend to be people who are more likely to do well when they sit down and try to control it, just because they have the facility. But there can be some people who have never had those experiences before, and once they sit down and try to do it, they can do it. So there's a lot to learn about it.
And how can one raise this awareness of precognition and practice?
Yes. So that's one of the major reasons we wrote the book. Is a whole chunk of it is about how do you raise this awareness. So we have several recommendations. So some of the basic ones are: keep a journal where you write down your intuitions or your strong feelings, strong experiences, and you can actually record, are they, and your dreams, and you can actually record, do they happen or not. This is really helpful from both sides of the equation. I get emails often from people who are delusional and who think that they have ability to predict all the future all the time, and they don't, because they don't predict my response to their email. But also, it's not helpful to them. It can cause you to go kind of crazy, and that's not good. So it's actually very, very good to notice all the times when things you predict don't come true, so that you can keep yourself from thinking that you're God or something. Um, at the same time, it's helpful for people who might be skeptical or who don't think they have any experiences like this. They can notice all the times where things do happen. So it's sort of a way to keep yourself honest and observe the data. I'm scientifically inclined, so I think about observing the data a lot, but it does help people start to open up to that. Another thing that's really helpful is meditation. So quieting the mind and being in a compassionate relationship with yourself. Another thing that helps is belief. So part of why we structured the book as the first section being about the scientific evidence for precognition, and then the second section being about practice, is because we know from scientific experiments that people who believe in precognition are better performers of precognition. In other words, your score on precognition tasks goes up when you believe precognition is scientifically valid. So that's part of is just educating yourself. And then, of course, the biggest part is practice. So we created this website for free that anyone in the world could use. I guess maybe China might block it, but whatever. But whatever country allows access to the internet. At premonitioncode.com, there's a training area which is free, and people could use it as much as they want. And it uses a random number generator to predict to create a picture. But before that, it asks you to choose between two graphs that show the elements in the picture, and you have to decide which of those you have predicted. And then it shows you the picture. It's a very difficult task. Of course, we're asking people to predict the future that's randomly selected. So it's not easy, but it can let people practice. And when there's a forum on Telegram, a bunch of people talking about this, and every once in a while someone chimes in and talks about their experience. And I think that's one of the more valuable pieces, is having a community of people who don't think you're crazy as you're trying to develop this skill. Because I think in 5 or 10 years, we will be in a place culturally, most countries will be in a place where we will be using this skill in some way. Right now, people are using this skill, but not talking about it. So I've worked with, law enforcement before. I know many other people who are good at this have worked with law enforcement or with the government, with corporations. People get paid to work with corporations, but they don't talk about it. I think in about 5 or 10 years, this will become a more commonly used skill as people practice it. One of the benefits of practicing it is you get to learn your own mind. So you learn about all the different parts of what you're not conscious of, and it's kind of delightful because parts of you kind of tell jokes, or you get to know these sort of ways that your mind does things, and I think it's really calming. I think it's a beautiful experience.
I see our mind like a big universe, yeah, and it's very easy to believe in something, yeah. But as a scientist, do you believe that there is a spiritual world, or can you prove this?
So I don't know how one would prove it because of this. So in terms of belief, so let's talk about belief first, because that's very different than the question of what. I have a very strong and close and intimate relationship with God. So if you want to call that a spiritual world, you can. I don't. That is like my primary relationship, and so I don't worry about any other stuff like angels or any of that stuff. It's just like me and God, we have conversations, you know. So, so that feels fine, and I don't have an opinion about what anyone else should believe about that. That's just my experience, and I can't prove that God is holding up the other kind of side of that conversation. I can't record God on a tape recorder. It's all inside my mind, right?
Science will never be able to do that, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So in terms of what can be proven, what I've noticed about science is that as soon as something is shown, as soon as you can do an experiment to show that something exists, then right now in science, it's taken to mean that um, whatever you showed that existed exists in the physical world. Because many scientists are physicalists, which means they believe the only thing that exists is physicality for the material world. Um, so right now, if you show that, let's say angels exist, if somehow you could do an experiment to show that angels exist, people would say, oh, well, then there's some aspect of the physical world. There are creatures in some other dimension that we don't normally see, or whatever it is. But I think that the physicality bias, or the bias towards materialism in science, is shifting. And I think that in time we'll start to say, actually, the mental world exists, the spiritual world exists, the physical world exists. And we'll start to try to look at evidence that supports that, like near-death experiences, or mediumship, or these other kind of things that have also been studied scientifically. So for instance, I don't know if you know about the Windbridge Institute's work, but I'm sorry, it's called the Windbridge Research Center now. But anyway, they do wonderful research on mediumship. And so there's very good scientists who are very interested in these things. And we sort of have this small group of, a little circle of people who talk about this stuff. Um, but I think things are shifting towards understanding that there's more to the world or the universe than meets the eye, and that there might be creative ways to test for that. But I almost want to wait until we're past this time when we say just because we show something exists means it's physical necessarily. Did that make sense?
Yeah, makes opens up just a few more questions.
That's okay. Of course it does.
What happens when we die?
I don't know. Do you know?
Oh, that's what I'm asking.
It's not what I study, and it's not only not what I study. I also the reason why I feel like I think it's very interesting to think about what happens after you die, but I also think there's too much focus on what happens after you die, and not enough focus on trying to make this life, which is the one we for sure know we have, a place where people are compassionate and kind to themselves and others. And so I worry about putting so much import in afterlife when we have this, we're 100% sure we have this life right now, you know? And that needs more attention. So that to me is really important.
How can we trust our thoughts? So let's say that if we are tapping into our future, um, how can
We
we do?
can't, we can't, and we shouldn't. They're not all correct. We could
So
only
how can we recognize good or bad thoughts, or I mean, right or bad ones? Or
correct or incorrect. It's really difficult and it takes practice. So it's like we expect it to be easy. It's like expecting a child to be born and saying when they're 9 o'clock, okay, you should go play, 9 o'clock, 9 years old, say, oh, you should go play cello now. And the kid's like, I've never seen a cello. How am I supposed to know how to play a cello? It's insane. I mean, this is an extremely polished skill that takes years to develop. So most of us can't tell the difference between correct and incorrect intuitions. Although I will say that if what you're calling an intuition or a precognition or a premonition is making you really, really anxious, it might not come and that might not be accurate. Usually, and again, this is not 100% true, but usually premonitions or precognitions that are accurate actually calm you down, even if they're of negative events. Because it's like the universe is saying, I mean, this is my interpretation. Your body is responding to knowing something and is saying, okay, I know this is going to happen. Now, how can I prepare for it? So I had a story of a woman who came to me after I gave a bookstore talk. And she said, I'm here to get one of your books signed for a friend because my friend, her daughter had a birthday party, and at the birthday party, her daughter received a dress. And as soon as the mother, her friend, looked at the dress, she had a sentence come into her head that was just very clear, and it said, your daughter will die in this dress. She'll be buried in this dress. And, she was only 6 years old, and she was like, what? Totally healthy kid. So it was a horrible experience to have that sentence come into her head, but at the same time, it did not panic her. She just felt a knowing. She felt it was correct, and she took the daughter to the doctor and found out the daughter had a brain tumor, and 6 months later, the daughter was in fact buried in that dress. But she says because of that knowing, it sounds horrible to know that your child will die. But because of that knowing, she could have a good relationship with her daughter during that time, and she didn't have to freak out about, oh my God, she just knew the fact. She just felt like she knew it 100%. And she just thought, well, now I can have 6 months with my daughter, where I'm just being with her and loving her. Because she couldn't do anything about the brain tumor. So that's one way. But um, honestly, each person will have their own way, and learning how to do it for yourself and learning your own mind is really it's like a meditative practice, except with feedback, because you find out if you're right or wrong, right? So it's a skill. Yeah.
So do you think that as soon as we are born, that our destiny is already written in some way, and when we're tapping into this future, that we can change it?
Yeah. I never know how to answer this question because, first of all, we don't know. I mean, there's arguments on both sides in physics and in philosophy and in psychology. So some people make decent arguments that the future is destined and that's it, set in stone. And other people make decent arguments that there's free will and you can change things. What I do know is that psychologically, the best thing for people to hear is that you can change your future. In other words, when people have the experience of feeling helpless, it's not good for them. So we are designed to feel like we can change the future. Whether we can or not, whether that's a real, accurate experience or not, I don't know. But all I know is I encourage people to have that experience that you can, because it feels better than being helpless. And frankly, truth when it comes to your own life, the truth of how you're made or what it is that you're meant to do is not necessarily as important as thriving in your life and being happy. And part of being happy and being functional is feeling like you can do something. So that's a complicated answer, but it's just better psychologically for people to feel like they can change the future. And given that we don't scientifically know what the answer is, we might as well believe that. And it might be true.
So you think that if you would be more aligned to our subconscious mind, that we might be living much more better life without stress, or maybe much more easier?
Yeah. Well, I think it's tricky. I think if you spend your whole time thinking, well, everything should be better and I can make it better, etc., that can make you depressed because you only have because you only have a certain amount of ability to affect the universe. I think there's this dance that we have to do between recognizing that some things are out of our control and recognizing that we have control over some things. And we're just not as important as we'd like to think we are, but we're also not as unimportant as we kind of wish we were when we're feeling helpless. So there's an old Talmudic saying, keep two notes in your pockets. In one pocket, keep a note that says the universe was created just for me, And in the other pocket, keep a note that says I'm as important as a grain of sand. And I do think that we're balancing between these two.
Do you think that we are supposed to tap in our future? Or are we just playing God?
I think that God is much more powerful than if we think that we could like outsmart God. Um, that's just wrong. But it seems to me, I think that we only are capable of doing things that God is allowing us to do. So, I mean, I define God. So let me just be more careful. I define God as the power that moves in us and beyond us and among us and is bigger than us. And so it doesn't seem possible to me that we could do anything that God would not be allowing us to do.
You said that time as such doesn't exist. So that means that future, past, and present are all one. Is that all three realities are running at the same time?
So it's not that time doesn't exist. And if I said that, I don't think I said that, but if I said that, I didn't mean that. I thought what I said was that the future can be accessed now and that the future has an influence on the past. That doesn't mean time doesn't exist. It means that there are influences in between past, present, and future that we don't normally think about. So here's a pillow. It has this picture of a tree, right?
Okay.
Okay. So imagine this is time. We're used to thinking of time as a line. Imagine this is time. Okay. Now, this part of the tree right here can exist at the same time that this swing exists, can exist at the same time that these branches exist, right? We're used to that in a picture. It's not a problem that these branches are coexisting with this trunk is coexisting with this swing. That's not a problem. So similarly, when we start to understand time, I think we're going to end up experiencing or also physically knowing, in other words, having data showing that just like in that picture, the past, future, and present can coexist. And you can travel mentally. Just like when you're looking at this, you can mentally decide you're going to look up here, and now I'm going to look here, and now I'm going to look down here, right?
Mm.
That's just something you're doing with your mind. And we take for granted that we can move our eyes around and we can mentally look at a scene. It's not a problem, right? And that's what we're talking about here. That's really what precognition is. It's like mental time travel.
Is this when somebody sees these flashes in a vacant state
Like you do.
some realities or some future? Is this
Yeah.
probably we just switching from one reality to another reality?
Maybe it's really not clear how it works. It may be that exactly as you stated very beautifully about your own experience. It may be that there's an 80% chance that this reality and this conversation will happen, and then there's a 20% chance that this reality conversation will happen. And sometimes, you see the 80% one and you're correct, it does happen. And sometimes you see the 20% one, or sometimes you see the 80% one and the 20% one happens, right? So it could be this probabilistic thing where statistically, one of the reasons why precognition isn't always correct is because the future is statistical, and you don't always see the thing that happens because the probabilities are shifting. So that's one idea. I mean, there's so many different ideas about this, and the answer is not known, so I could just spout ideas all day, but it doesn't really matter. So what really ends up mattering, I mean, so people also have this idea that if they understand this intellectually, then they'll be able to do it. And that's not the case. It's like saying, like, I could tell you how the neurons in your premotor cortex are talking to the neurons that are in your spinal cord and that are helping your fingers play piano. I could talk to you about that for an hour and explain to you each of those parts, but you're not going to be a better piano player at the end of the hour, right? Just knowing that, who cares? What matters is practice. And so that's part of what I'm wanting to get people to do, is recognize this is not an intellectual exercise. This is almost like playing piano. This is a practice exercise. You learn with your whole body and your mind how to do this, how to mentally travel in time. And if you have a skill at that, which you do, clearly based on what you've said, you can polish that up and you can learn about how to do that, and it can become a helpful tool to yourself and in society. In the book we talk about this thing, positive precogs. This is just a name for people who are pursuing learning precognition and practicing as a way to help the world and help themselves.